Drugs are bad. Actually, Saga of the Swamp Thing was one of the first corporate comics to eschew the Comics Code Authority so that they could depict swamp sex and characters ingesting psychedelic substances, which grow out of Swamp Thing's body. Writer Alan Moore actually was an LSD dealer when he was a teenager. This episode of Fansplainer is eschewing the YouTube advertising guidelines so that I can talk about the science of psychedelics. The word psychedelic comes from the Greek, psyche for mind, delos for reveal. But what do these drugs actually reveal about how the brain works? Please open your sagas to issue 34, Rite of Spring. Spoiler warning, Abby Arcane can't quite manage traditional penetrative sex with her boyfriend, Swamp Thing, because he's a plant. But this is a super sex-positive story, and they're gonna make it work. They figure out a way to have this psychedelic mind sex. Swamp Thing grows these tubers out of his body, and when Abby eats one, she sees the world as Swamp Thing sees it. Abby experiences the first psychedelic effect, hallucinations.
I've never seen such infinite beauty in my life. I wish I could talk in Technicolor.
But before we talk about altered perception, I want to lay some groundwork about how normal perception works. You might imagine that your vision works like a video camera. Pixel by pixel, frame by frame, it feeds the image to your brain to say, this is a cookie. Pizzelle, actually. But the truth is much messier. Your brain is constantly filtering down to some key basics and just losing everything else. For example, your eyes do these things called saccades. They move back and forth involuntarily, and your brain just edits out all of that movement. So your experience of vision as a smooth, continuous reality isn't really true. It just feels that way in hindsight. It's kind of like YouTube's video compression algorithm, Flash. It just saves a few keyframes and then reconstructs everything via interpolation when you play it back. Also, how many people really notice that these two plants have been switching places? It gets even weirder. Your brain just cannot process all of the data from your senses coming in all of the time. So in order to keep up with reality, it does a lot of predictive processing, which is a fancy word for guessing. So have you ever seen a shape in the clouds or a face in an outlet? That's called pareidolia. And it works because your brain has these circuits for recognizing certain things, like faces or motion or color. And those circuits can misfire. So by circuits, I really mean networks of neurons, brain cells. You'll remember from episode 1, we were talking about how brain cells communicate across receptors, like tree roots do. And these receptors are electrochemical locks. And you need the right shaped key to click in there to unlock a connection. Those keys are neurotransmitters. And the main neurotransmitter that we're going to talk about is serotonin. So let's say that I ate a magic mushroom. The psilocybin would be metabolized into psilocin that hits my brain, and guess what? The psilocin happens to be shaped a lot like serotonin. Not perfectly, but enough to click into certain serotonin receptors, mainly 5-HT, 1A, 2A, and 2C. Acid and peyote work the same way. And so when you have psychedelics flooding those 5-HT2A receptors, you're much more likely to have perceptual misfires. That sensor in your brain to see faces is on a hair trigger, and the alarm is just popping off. And the same thing can happen with any of your senses, motion, sound, anything like that. There's a second important component to hallucinations. EEG scans show that your brain is constantly doing these steady electrical pulses in the alpha band. And it seems to work sort of like a metronome. And if you have unruly brain activity, it just makes it kind of conform to the rhythm. But when you're on psychedelics, that alpha band just gets weaker, and it allows unruly mental melodies to catch on and spread. Speaking of music, Duke Ellington, he had synesthesia. So did Vladimir Nabokov, the writer. And synesthesia is a condition where your perception gets a little mixed. So people with synesthesia might experience certain words as seeming to have colors associated with them, or certain sounds might have a smell to them. Psychedelics can cause some people to experience temporary synesthesia, So in our music metaphor, this is like the tuba playing the violinist's part. There's way more that I could say about how hallucinations reveal things about creativity and dreams, but I'm gonna stick to the pharmacology of psychedelics for now.
No. Good heavens.
The trip can veer between feelings of euphoria and paranoia, and that's kind of what happens to Abby. That's the topic of our next episode. Thanks so much for watching. If you like this video, subscribe to me!